The movie opens at the launch of the Mustang. A little boy just wants to peek inside the expensive car, but a stern vice president stops him and warns him not to touch anything. The boy apologizes immediately, but the vice president won't let it go. He tracks down the boy's father and arrogantly demands that the father discipline his child. The boy pulls his hand back, scared. But the father is not intimidated. He first praises the car, saying it looks nice. Then, without missing a beat, he points out that the interior is too cluttered and the flashy details are only there to impress ordinary people. He says he would rather buy a Chevrolet Camaro than this terrible car. You would never guess it, but this ordinary-looking man is actually Ken Miles, the most legendary and talented driver in history. At the 24 Hours of Le Mans, one of the 3 most prestigious races in the world, Ken Miles would go on to drive the Ford GT40, which he modified with his own hands, and defeat the Ferrari racing team. Ferrari had dominated that race for 5 years. Ken almost became the first person ever to win all 3 major races, Sebring, Daytona, and Le Mans, in the same year. If you've been feeling a lack of passion for life lately, be patient and watch this story to the end. It will move you to tears and give you the motivation to overcome any difficulty. Back in the 1960s, Ferrari was the world's leading race car brand. Enzo Ferrari poured every dollar into perfection and racing, which drove his company to the edge of bankruptcy. Meanwhile, Ford was selling tons of cars but losing its edge. A senior Ford executive suggested buying Ferrari. The company's vice president laughed at the idea. He said Ferrari didn't even build as many cars in a year as Ford built in a single day. Ferrari spent more on toilet paper than Ford spent on racing development. The vice president was brutally sarcastic. But the senior executive said something that stunned the room. He said Enzo Ferrari would be remembered forever as the greatest automaker in history. Why? Because when people talk about race cars, they remember Ferrari. Ferrari means victory. No one remembers who built the most cars. Ferrari had won Le Mans 4 times. People longed to share in that victory. So what if Ford became a symbol of winning, too? Who wouldn't want to be on top, respected by everyone? Henry Ford II immediately sent executives to buy Ferrari. They offered an enormous $16 million and promised to let Enzo keep his racing division. It seemed like a perfect deal. But Enzo asked one question: if he wanted to race at Le Mans, who would he listen to? The Ford executive answered honestly, the boss. That meant Ford would strip Ferrari of all independence. Enzo had given his whole life to the racetrack. He could never accept that humiliation. Enzo became furious. He cursed the Ford executives and told them to go back and tell their stubborn boss that his management team were worthless bastards. Then he said the words that cut deepest: tell him he is not Henry Ford. He is only Henry Ford II. Henry Ford II could have ignored the insults, but not that one. What man can stand being second forever? His face went dark. He ordered his team to find the best engineers and drivers, spare no expense, and build a car that would humiliate Ferrari at their own most sacred race, Le Mans. The vice president sought out Carroll Shelby. Shelby was a legend, the only American driver to ever win at Le Mans. But a heart condition forced him into early retirement. Still, his passion for speed never died, so he became a car designer. At first, Shelby refused. Le Mans is different from any other race: 13.7 kilometers of country roads with corners that have no banking and no barriers. Drivers race non-stop for 24 hours. It tests the limits of both driver and machine. The car must reach over 320 kilometers per hour while being stable and fuel efficient. Ken Miles was a brilliant driver, but his personality was blunt and impulsive. After retiring from racing, he opened a repair shop. All he had to do was fix cars for customers. But Ken couldn't help lecturing people who drove luxury cars, telling them the problem wasn't the car, it was their poor driving skills. So he didn't make much money, and his reputation got worse. He had to move constantly just to keep working. But just 2 days later, Shelby showed up at his door. When Ken heard that Ford wanted to beat Ferrari in 90 days, he burst out laughing. It was almost impossible. Everyone knew about Ford's bureaucracy and stubbornness. Even with unlimited money, did Shelby really think Ford would build Ken's dream car? Ken turned and walked away. But Shelby wasn't bothered. That evening, Shelby invited Ken to see a new race car he had designed. Ken verbally refused, but when he saw that beautiful machine, the desire in his eyes was impossible to hide. He immediately got in and drove off. After just one lap, Ken had already identified the car's weaknesses: poor grip, third gear too high, the front end too light, causing inflexible steering. Shelby knew then that Ken had accepted the offer. He just hadn't found a way to tell his wife yet. When Ken's wife asked him what was going on, he stammered and made excuses. But she was no pushover. She suddenly slammed the gas pedal, swerving wildly down the road while Ken screamed in panic. She wasn't angry about the racing, she just hated being kept in the dark. Once Ken told her about Shelby's offer, she gave one condition: Ford had to pay him a proper salary. Ford was generous, $200 a day. Ken's wife couldn't believe it. But Ken still hadn't fully decided. From then on, he began the grueling work of testing the car while earning that money. To solve air resistance, they taped wool tufts to the body and stripped out every unnecessary part to reduce weight. But after another test drive, Ken said the car could still go faster. The problem was stability. If they kept reducing weight, the car would become dangerous. So they needed a more powerful engine, an aluminum V8. With Ken and Shelby working together, the Ford GT40 kept breaking lap records. But one day before the first big race, the vice president, the same man Ken had embarrassed earlier, told Shelby that Ken was not allowed to represent Ford. The reason was simple: they feared he would misspeak to the media and damage the company's image. Shelby fought for him, but power is power. Ken didn't complain much. Instead, he warned that the GT40's gearbox was prone to overheating, and his replacement driver would need to control speed very carefully. On race day, Ken went to work as usual. Alone in the workshop, he turned on the radio. What he feared most had happened: all three GT40s retired due to gearbox problems. Ferrari won again. Henry Ford II was furious. But amazingly, Shelby regained control of the racing team. He immediately called Ken, but Ken was still angry and greeted him with a punch. The two men, both over 40, wrestled on the lawn like children. But conflicts between men often end after one good fight. Ken returned to the team. With relentless effort, the GT40 got faster and more stable. Then a new problem emerged. During a maximum acceleration test, the brakes overheated and failed. Fire engulfed the car. Luckily, Ken's fireproof suit saved his life. As soon as he climbed out, he pointed at the brakes and said they needed to be improved. Meanwhile, that slimy vice president had regained the trust of Henry Ford II and was promoted to director of the racecar project. He immediately planned to remove Ken from the team again. So when the boss came for an inspection, Shelby locked the vice president in his office. Then he invited Henry Ford II to personally experience the latest GT40 to feel what speed and excitement really were. Once the boss was strapped in, Shelby took off. The raw terror of speed made Henry Ford II scream like a child. By the end, the most powerful man in American automobiles was crying like a 250-pound baby. Shelby's goal was to make this arrogant man understand that not just anyone could tame this machine. But the vice president wasn't done; he had already found another driver. So Shelby made a bet: if Ken Miles won the Daytona 24 Hours, he would drive at Le Mans. If he lost, Shelby would mortgage his entire company to Ford. Ken made it to the starting line. At the halfway point, he was leading with an overwhelming advantage. But the vice president started playing tricks. He ordered a rev limit for all drivers, no more than 6,000 revolutions per minute, claiming the gearbox was overheating. Then, when repairs were needed, he brought in a professional NASCAR team to help his own driver. That made them much faster. Entering the final stage, the vice president's driver took the lead. He even opened champagne to celebrate early. But Shelby stayed calm. He quickly wrote a few words on a board, ran to the trackside, and held it up. The board said, "Just hit 7,000 revolutions per minute for the hell of it." Ken saw it and slammed the gas. The GT40 shot forward like an untamed beast, passing one opponent after another. Everyone worried the car might fall apart. But racers are never afraid to try. The vice president watched in panic. On the final lap, Ken floored the gas, pushing past 7,000 revolutions. The car roared and overtook second place, then first. When the checkered flag waved, Ken Miles crossed the finish line first, earning his ticket to Le Mans on his own merit. The crowd roared. Shelby finally felt the weight lift from his heart. That night, friends celebrated. But Ken knew Le Mans in 5 months would be the real challenge. Ken came home to find his son studying the Le Mans circuit. He made a promise: he would run a perfect lap without a single mistake and create a miracle no one had ever achieved. June 1966. The night before Le Mans, Ken couldn't sleep. He walked the track alone, touching the first corner with his own feet to understand how rough the road really was. The next morning, drivers took their positions. At the signal, they rushed to their cars. Immediately, chaos crashes took out many drivers before they even really started. Ken avoided the wrecks, but something worse happened. His car door wouldn't close. He had to steer with one hand and hold the door with the other. A red Ferrari overtook him, the driver smirking at Ken's struggle. Henry Ford II complained loudly while old Enzo Ferrari watched calmly, amused. Finally, one of Ken's mechanics grabbed a hammer and slammed the door shut. Force creates miracles. Ken was free to race, though he was now almost in last place. In a 24-hour race, as long as you don't give up, anything can happen. That's the beauty of sport. Ken pushed harder. The GT40 roared like an unstoppable monster. He climbed to 20th place, then broke the world record with a lap of 3 minutes and 34 seconds. His son cheered at home. Shelby smiled. But that was just the beginning. On the third lap, Ken raised his average speed to 229 km per hour, an impossible feat at the time. Even entering corners, he didn't brake. He downshifted and glided through using inertia. The commentators had never seen such skill. A quarter of the way through, one Ferrari was eliminated in a crash, but two others still held the lead. Enzo Ferrari stayed with his drivers the whole time, a man who truly loved racing. Meanwhile, Ford's golden boy vice president had already abandoned the race to hang out with his new secretary. 8 hours in, Ken was only 2 laps behind the leader. Then heavy rain began, blinding and slippery. Ken, who had shined during the day, became a target. But he drove like the car was part of his body. A gentle tap of the brake sent an opponent spinning off into the grass, his car smashed to pieces. Soon Ken faced the last Ferrari driver, Bandini. Both raced at terrifying speeds in the dark rain. As Ken tried to overtake, the GT40's old brake problem returned. A violent collision forced him into the pits for new brakes. That delay let Ferrari gain another lap. Before Ken left, Shelby reminded him, to win, he had to overtake his opponent 2 more times. Ken nodded and hit the gas. He drove like a madman until dawn. Finally, he caught the Ferrari at a 90-degree corner. The two cars ran side by side at 370 km per hour, insane speed for a corner. Neither would give way. Bravery was the deciding factor. Bandini lost his nerve first and hit the brakes. Ken overtook. That was only the first time. He knew the next lap would be the real battle. After more chase laps, Ken caught the Ferrari again at the exact same spot. This time, Bandini would not back down. Ken floored it, 7,000 revolutions per minute. The Ferrari climbed even higher, 9,000 revolutions per minute, and started pulling ahead. Then the Ferrari's engine gave out. Bandini had to watch with tears as his car failed. All 3 Ferraris were out. Ken was in first place, leading the second-place car, a young driver named McLaren, by 4 full minutes. As long as time ran out, Ken would be champion. But the idiot vice president showed up again. With Ford holding the top 3 positions, he told Henry Ford II that if all 3 Ford cars crossed the finish line together, it would be the most glorious moment in Ford history. Henry loved the idea. Shelby said it was impossible. Ken was leading by over a lap. To wait for the others, Ken would have to slow down. But idiots never think they're wrong. Shelby smashed his cup in anger. He knew Ken was 1 step away from the Triple Crown, winning Sebring, Daytona, and Le Mans in the same year, something no one had ever done. But he couldn't defy the boss. So he gave the decision to Ken. Shelby told him that even if he slowed down, he would still be the first person to win all 3 races in 1 year. Whatever Ken chose, Shelby would stand by him. Ken asked one more time to be sure, then returned to the track. Ken pushed away all worry and focused completely on driving. He showed the absolute limit of the machine. The vice president watched nervously but could do nothing. Lap after lap, Ken's cornering got more precise. He was fulfilling his promise to his son and his own lifelong dream. He floored the gas on the straight, ran a perfect lap without a single flaw, and broke the world record for the 3rd time in 1 day, 3 minutes and 30.6 seconds. Even old Enzo Ferrari tipped his hat in admiration. Ken happily sang the victory song he always shared with his son. Then, on the final lap, Ken suddenly took off his goggles and slowed down. No one knew what he was thinking. Maybe maturity means chasing what you love and leaving your ego behind. The other 2 Ford cars caught up. All 3 crossed the finish line together. Ford shone brightly. But when Ken opened his door to embrace the champion's moment, everyone's eyes were on another driver, McLaren. Both Ken and Shelby had been tricked. McLaren had started 8 meters behind Ken on the grid, so he had technically driven a longer distance and was declared the winner. Disappointment filled Ken's eyes. But he looked up and saw Enzo Ferrari tipping his hat to him from across the track. True racers always respect each other. Shelby felt crushing guilt. He had cost Ken the Triple Crown, a feat no one has ever achieved to this day. But Ken quickly put it aside. Winning wasn't everything. He cherished the moment itself. The two best friends put their arms around each other's shoulders, planning to take a shower, have some hot tea, and eat ham and cheese sandwiches. They promised to come back next year and beat everyone again. After Le Mans, Ken and Shelby continued developing faster cars. Ken kept testing as usual. One day, the engine revs exceeded 7,000 revolutions per minute. The brakes overheated and failed again. The legendary racing king's life ended. In 2001, Ken Miles was posthumously inducted into the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America. Some people ask if chasing the limit is worth it. The answer is in the romance of 7,000 revolutions per minute. The brilliant light Ken Miles radiated for the one thing he loved most. It moves every heart and teaches us that in life, it's enough to focus on doing one thing well.